Welcome to another audio video of boring Eastern Roman history. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071 is even to this very day celebrated in Turkey as an important historical event. It showed that the Eastern Roman army was able to be beaten and its emperor Romanos IV Diogenes was captured. This also allowed the Seljuk Turks to continue to take over Anatolia away from the Eastern Romans for good. So it is debated, was this battle of great importance or even the start of an inevitable decline of the Eastern Roman Empire? The simple answer is no. For civil wars continued to till 1079, and the decline really started after the death of Basil II in 1025. So why Basil 1025? Well, in 1025, the empire had extended its borders, conquered the Bulgarians for good, the military was strong, the coffers were full, and the aristocracy was put in check by Basil II. When his brother and successor Constantine the Eighth took over and ruled from 1025 to about 1028, and those 3 years he depleted the coffers, did not maintain the armies or provinces. He was too busy being a playboy and being an ineffective emperor. So going after his death, it went to Romanos III Argyros, who ruled from 1028 to 1034. And he did nothing of significance and was eventually murdered by his wife and her lover, who became Michael III. He ruled from 1034 to 1041. Now, Michael III turned out to be a good general, an effective emperor, and a ferocious tax collector, but he allowed the power to shift to the civil bureaucracy, which weakened the military aristocracy. So here we start to see the rise of the civil aristocracy and the decline of the military aristocracy, which slowly unraveled everything Basil II had built and kept in check with the nobility. The real shit show began with Constantine IX Monomachus, 1042 to 1055. It was these crucial years that we see the empire decline and decay, and civil wars between the civil aristocracy and military aristocracy factions. We see the Pechenegs, Cumans, Normans raiding in the west. We see the Seljuk Turks in the east coming into Anatolia in 1044, unchecked. Constantine IX spent money foolishly and starved the army of funds. He reduced generals' authority, cut back to provincial armies, especially in the east, in the Armenican theme. This would spell disaster since Armenia was the gateway to the Eastern Roman Empire, and allowing this to fall in the hands of the Seljuk Turks. Constantine IX was a bureaucrat and served the capital's politicians, and he started using mercenaries instead of the provincial peasant soldiers, which caused lack of manpower to keep these provinces in Roman control. General Kikomenos stated Constantine IX destroyed the empire for he was more concerned with being a judge than ruling an empire. So you see, it wasn't the Battle of Manzikert that was the cause of Anatolia to be lost and the empire's decline. It was the loss of the Armenican theme prior to this battle that deprived the empire of land, soldiers, taxes, and the gateway that protected these barbarians from entering the empire's heartland. So the loss of the Armenican theme opened the floodgates into these lands, which brings us to 1071 Battle of Manzikert. As a whole, we see minimal losses on the Eastern Roman side. So this loss didn't make the empire any more vulnerable. All we see is a great tragedy from multiple generals, units betraying and fleeing Romanos. Romanos' side in the battle, then him losing his throne, his eyes, and eventually his life at the hands of the powerful aristocratic Ducas family. Romanos' blinding and his inevitable death would cause a domino effect and a string of civil wars with Romans versus Romans that really allowed Anatolia to be lost to Turks forever. This was what I'm including is, of course, the rebellion of Botaniades in 1078, using Turks to help him march to Constantinople and become the emperor, and also Melissenos, who copied Botaniades and said, okay, let's use Turks, march my way to Constantinople, and then I'll just use these Turks to garrison these important cities, and geez, I'll never take it back from them, nor will they leave. So that just right there sealed the fate of central Western Anatolia forever. Um, that sealed Anatolia up as almost a whole for the Turks. So we cannot blame Romanos IV for this for he did inherit an empire that was weak and crumbling prior to 1068 when he became emperor. The real disservice, I believe, to the empire was from Constantine the Ninth and Constantine X, Dukas. I believe the capital, as well as the Empress Eudokia, realized the dire situation for the empire after Constantine's death. We're talking about Constantine X. They need a strong general type emperor to deal with the Turks. Now, this will lead us into Romanos Diogenes' story, but first let's look at his past prior to becoming emperor. So Romanos' father, Constantine Diogenes, was a prominent general who had served with distinction under Basil II. He was the first significant member of the noble Cappadocian Diogenes family and was the commander of the Western Tagmata in the Balkans. Constantine was successful against the Bulgarians in 1014 at the Battle of Clydian. This is where he succeeded Theophylact Botaniates as Duke of Thessalonica with the rank of Patricos. This made him the second most powerful general in the Balkans after David Aronides. So Constantine was known for building the fortress of Myalobos. Then in 1015, along with Aronides, they plundered Pologonia. Then he was promoted commander of the Scholai of the West, and here he took Sirmium in 1018 and was given the title of Strategos of Serbia. In 1022 or 1025, he succeeded David Aronides as overall commander of Bulgaria. So this is how fast Romanos' father fast-tracked up the ranks, becoming the overall commander of Bulgaria. Rightfully so. In 1027, he repelled a large Pechenik invasion and then was recalled back south to Thessalonica. In a seal that was found, he is known as Anthipatos, Patricos, and Duke of Thessalonica, Bulgaria, and Serbia. It was in the second year of Romanos III Agrios' reign he was accused, along with other prominent generals, of conspiring against the emperor. He was then beaten and publicly paraded on the back of a donkey through Constantinople, where he then was imprisoned and later tonsured and sent to a monastery. Okay, so this apparently did not stop him, for he was again charged with conspiracy, and before his trial, he committed suicide by jumping to his death. Now, his son Romanos never knew his father, for he was just about 2 years old when his father died. So his mother, interestingly, was a daughter of Basil Agrios, the emperor's brother. We do know Romanos IV was generous, courageous, and impetuous, which later would stick with him as a general and as an emperor and lead to his rise and fall. And these contagious qualities would cause other great generals loyal to him to fall as well. He quickly rose to the ranks on the Danube front. Now we're going to Romanos' thing. So he quickly rose to the ranks of the Danube front and was rewarded for his service as Duke of Serdica in 1065. Shortly after the death of Constantine X, Dukas, in 1067, Romanos conspired to usurp the throne from Constantine's infant son Michael, a trait he did inherit from his father. The regent and grandfather, Megas Duke John Dukas, tried to have Empress Eudokia sign a contract not to remarry. She had two possible suitors, one general, Nikephoros Botaniates, and the other she chose was, of course, Romanos Diogenes. We must stop and look at why she chose Romanos, who was 37 at the time, known for his good looks and energy, and the famous Botaniates, who was 65 and at the end of his long career. It was logical to select Romanos, who also came from Cappadocia. His land there and the Turks were raiding the provinces of Anatolia and establishing a foothold since the 1040s. So we see this young energetic Emperor Romanos IV ready to wage war on the Turks and push them out of Anatolia and Armenia. Some might question why Romanos, who we have seen his military command, in my opinion, was mediocre. He was almost fighting the Hungarians in 1059, where ironically Nikephoros Botaniates actually saved his life during this fight. We do know, it's a no-brainer. Eudokia saw, he had looks, youth, charm, and, do you really want to, start doing a 65-year-old guy? I don't think so. So, Romanos' first campaign in 1068, we can look at, he says he had good intentions of trying to secure the Eastern Theme, which was collapsing at a slow rate, which he had mentioned previously. the campaign in the east, he was unable to safeguard the eastern access routes to Cappadocia and the Anatolian plateau from invaders coming from the Armenian highlands or through the Euphrates frontier. Romanos was so focused on the east, he neglected the threats in the west. In 1068, Bari, the last Eastern Roman stronghold, was being besieged by the Normans, who wrestled away previously southern Italy during those other dipshit emperors that we mentioned. Romanos did try and send a few ships with provisions and a minimal number of men, but by 1070 it did fall. Romanos in 1069 made a close friend with the general Manuel Comnenos, who he promoted to Kuropolites, then prostrator, and finally strategos of the eastern Tegmata, and rightfully so. Romanos' 1069 campaign did not fare any better than his 1068 one. With no success against the Turks, he had to spend all of 1070 staying in the capital to squash rumors and dissent throughout the capital. Being still proactive, he did send this Manuel Comnenos in his place, and Manuel actually had success against the Turks by capturing the fortress Hierapolis. What hindered Manuel's success was that Romanos sent word for him to split his army, where half was to garrison this Hierapolis and the other half to attack Caesarea. This actually resulted in Manuel not having enough troops and being attacked and captured. Manuel captured actually talks about a Turk named Ariskia or Erebusgan by modern historians, but he was known by his Greek name as Christocolos. This Christocolos helped him escape, for Christocolos was the brother-in-law to the Seljuk leader Alp Arslan. And during this time, these two were having a falling out, so this was perfect timing. He arranged with Christocolos and his men to enter Eastern Roman service, which they did, and Romanos bestowed the title of Padros on him. So there's an interesting note in David Nicole's book on Manzikert. We see a statue of a Turkish chieftain in Byzantine armor dated 11th century. This must be related to the person in question, for no other Turkish chieftain has been identified in Eastern Roman service during this century. So it'd be kind of cool if that was made for him. Unfortunately, Manuel developed a lingering ear infection which killed him at the age of 23. Another note we must address: in 1069, the paid Norman mercenary in Eastern Roman service was Robert Crispin. Now, Crispin achieved many victories against the Turks, felt him and his men were not getting what was due to them by not getting enough pay, and eventually they revolted. This started, they went around and started robbing tax collectors. It was not like no Romans were killed, so they just robbed them and let them go. But this was alarming enough that Romanos sent Magistros Samuel Alcianos and his 5 regiments at the western Tegmata that happened to be wintering in Armenia to deal with Crispin and his men. Now, this Samuel happened to be Romanos' brother-in-law. Prior to marrying Eudokia, he was the grandson of the last Bulgarian king, Ivan Vladislav. Now, Samuel tried to be sneaky and attacked the Norman camp on Easter Day morning, but the Normans, being clever, saw this coming, and Samuel's men were badly defeated. Now, Crispin did show no ill will. He allowed the prisoners to go free and even tendered to the wounded and sent envoys to Romanos requesting a pardon. So you can see here that Crispin really did not want to be an enemy of the Romans. He really just felt like, hey, I really am worth this. I deserve this. And he made his point. And Romanos accepted and absolved his men of their crimes. So they received absolution. So shortly later, and more doing his men who didn't fully agree with the Roman terms started raiding in Mesopotamia. And then again, Crispin was arrested from his fortress at Maro Castron. And Maro Castron was kind of described as this sitting on a lofty hill in Armenia. So it was like a nice fortress. He was exiled to the island of Abydos in late 1069. It was explained more in detail in Sclitzky's work. I'm not going to go into that. But it's kind of like now you just lost this great commander that did really well at fighting the Turks. Now he's exiled. Okay, so this to me was a bad move for the Eastern Romans. If they would have allowed the Normans their fiefdom in Armenia, it would have helped keep a band-aid and a checkpoint to protect Anatolia from the Turks. for we see the Normans were more successful against them than the Romans were. There's another reason why. So basically, Roussel de Balue becomes the new commander of the Norman contingent after Crispin is exiled. So basically, this is another reason why you'll see later on why Roussel and the Normans abandoned Romanos and Manzikert. I mean, it just didn't sit well what happened to Crispin. It really shows a lack of priority on behalf of the Eastern Romans. Rather than deal with, they would rather deal with the Normans than fight the real enemy, the Turks. I mean, they were so scared of these Normans having this like fiefdom, which, like I was saying, they should have had, and I'm sure a lot of you agree with that too. It's like, I mean, as long as they're not sitting here and being an enemy of the Eastern Roman army, it's kind of like being like how Brachamios was. He had his own fiefdom and was still loyal to the Romans and helped be a buffer between the Arabs and the Turks for over a decade plus. That wasn't a problem, but the Normans were. Anyways, let's get back. So, 1071, Romanos gathers the largest army some historians say the Eastern Romans ever fielded since Vahan's army against the Muslims in the Battle of Yarmouk in 636. Some outrageous numbers were given from 400,000 men to 100,000. It's more realistic to estimate maybe around 40,000. We do know for sure it was extremely large of both Western and Eastern Tugmatas, as well as Armenians, Normans, Cumans, Bulgarians, Germans, Pechenegs, Syrians, Uz Turks, Kievan Rus, Khazars, Alans, Georgians, Orguz Turks, and the elite Varangian Guard. So we see he was fully committed to sending everything he had. He did not want to go back, I believe, to Constantinople empty-handed, and especially having another prior failed campaign. It shows again how more foreign mercenaries were being utilized over Roman manpower. So this is just the norm going forward since like the 10 early, let's say 1030s, 1040s, maybe up. They're just using mercenaries. So how many of these 40,000 men, let's see if that was the correct number, were non-combatants? So such as sappers, slaves, engineers, cooks. So we must take that number in consideration too to try to feed this massive army. You're going to have a lot of help. That's non-combats. First issue, Romanos encounters, and this was taken from Nicole's book again on Manzikert, states the area around Melagenia on the Sangaris River and where Romanos decided that what generals to send back home, including the experienced Botaniates, who retires to estates in Anatolia. Now, it makes you wonder this is me, it makes you wonder why did he have him come along in the first place? I mean, I think Botaniates would make a better logical decision than Andronicus Ducas. Now, I mean, I get it. He probably brought Andronicus Ducas with him as basically almost in his mind like a hostage because he had all these problems with the Ducas family. In all those strife in the capital from 1070 when he spent the whole year trying to squash that. But Botaniates was an experienced general, especially against the Turks as well. I think he would have been better to be his reserve commander and having Ducas, as I'll talk about later, in his center with him to keep an eye on and not have such like a large force of 5,000 men to be a reserve. But anyways, the other general that Romanos sent back was Alexios Komnenos. A couple factors was because of his young age and to console his mother due to the loss of Manuel. So after reaching Sebastia, Romanos held a military council to discuss whether to invade enemy-controlled territory or to stay and build defenses. This personally did not make sense to me that Romanos would consider not going on the offensive. We do know Romanos entered Cappadocia and discussed military tactics with his generals on how to proceed. Bryennios the Elder and Tarchoniotes advised him to avoid taking the fight so deep into enemy territory, whereas the younger ones said to push on, and that's what they did. On his way to Manzikert is where he met Magistros Nikephoros Basilakes, who joined Romanos with with a rather large force of Armenian men and cavalry. This is when Romanos decides to split his army into two. This guy just loves splitting his army. We saw what he did for Emmanuel in 1070 was a defeat. Also in 1069 campaign, Romanos at Romanopolis made Magistros Philoratios Brachiomios his second in command and split his army in two, which was a defeat for Brachiomios. Was to take the fortress of Alat, or some cities, Chiliot, and a large Turkish army approached where it was said he was defeated and panicked, and he was retreated back into Taros. So this tactic cost Romanos two armies, and inevitably his own in Manzikert, 1071. So this move was disastrous since leaving Theodosopolis in July, he had only received word that Arslan raised the siege of Aleppo and was making his way back towards them. The problem with him splitting his army was he was deaf and blind in Turkish controlled land, where Arslan was fully informed where he was and where he was going. Again, his senior generals, Tarchoniotes and Brioneos, advised him to wait at Manzikert. Romanos doesn't listen and sends Tarchoniotes with 20,000 men to take Chiliat and sends a Norman mercenaries, Roussel, numbering it's around 5 to maybe 1,000 men to forage for wheat. I understand the importance of this fort for it's close to Lake Van and ideal to keep the Turks from raiding west. Possibly he wanted to take it back since Brachiomios was beaten and part of the army there as well. Romanos believed Arslan would be marching south, going through Arsli north of Lake Van to Chiliat, cutting off the road to Manzikert. So Arslan, knowing where he was, he sent his second in command, some Sadak al-Turki, with 10,000 men to deal with Tarchoniotes, while he proceeded 30 miles away to Manzikert. Some sources state Tarchoniotes was defeated with minimal losses on August 23rd and routed, believing the whole Turkish army was on them. So it is possible that Roussel and Tarchoniotes believed the road to Manzikert was blocked, and they headed southward along the lake shore towards the citadel of Moose. Nicole believes that they were routed and defeated with minimal losses, and after 3 days of waiting at the citadel, her Romanos was defeated and headed for Melitene, then to Constantinople. We have to ask yourself this first: how did they receive intel that Romanos was defeated and 3 days after the fact? Survivors would not head south into enemy lines trying to find Tarchoniotes. I mean, so if he was cut off, how was he getting messengers? And we know Romanos was sending messengers to try to tell him, hey, come on back over. Both these armies were cut off from communication from the 23rd and weren't able to get messages across. I believe Tarchoniotes, being the second man, was pissed off from his counsel being twice rejected by Romanos and having Roussel in his ear, who was pissed off as well. It was a Crispin. Fed him the idea of banning Romanos, when in fact Sandik arrived with his army. And the word of a second Turkish army under Arslan arrived at Manzikert. So this bad blood for both parties helped seal Romanos' fate. Historian Hildebrand stated on the third day of journey towards Akalat, Tarchoniotes was attacked by the Turks. So this proves there were still lines of communication between Romanos and him, if that is true what Hildebrand says. When news reached Romanos, Basilikis dismissed it as a small bands of marauding Turks and not Sandak. Still having to ask yourself why a highly respected senior general who had 10,000 plus men did not assist Romanos. There's another theory from a Muslim historian that Roussel and Tark were defeated and Roussel lost his nose in battle. Now, historian Mr. Friendly talks about a good point, which I'll piggyback on. The historian Adelates during this time calls Tarchoniotes a scoundrel, but Branianios the Younger describes him as an excellent man for advice and military stratagems. He also states Tarchoniotes may have been so embittered, having his counsel twice rejected, first on proceeding into Armenia and secondly on the divisions of the army, that he had no desire to save the emperor from a potential catastrophe of his own making. I completely disagree with Mr. Friendly's statement about Roussel having no stomach for a chancy fight, because we see Roussel was a good commander like Crispin and brave, and I don't think it's not that he wanted to fight. I think he just was like, screw this. Romanos doesn't really know what he's doing. and just decided, okay, hey, let's just avoid this fight in the sense of uh, we'll just go back to the capital. I don't think it's really cowardice. I think it's just more like screw this. I'm not here for this. The battle between Romanos and Arslan lasted for 2 days. We have Arslan's army fighting in a crescent shape, with the center slowly moving backwards as the wings go forward. We have the used Turks mercenaries at the heat of the battle switch over to Arslan's side, and the Pechenegic cavalry raid and loot Romanos' camp. When Andronicus Ducas betrays the emperor, spreading word he was killed in battle, and flees with the 5,000 reserves. Before this, on day one, Briones' left wing started to take the bait of feigning retreat from the Turks and began to get surrounded. And Basilaki's cavalry rushes in as Briones flees, which causing decimating losses to Basilaki's men, and even being unhorsed and wounded, being taken captive. So you just see from like day one of this battle of Manzikert that nothing's going Romanos' way. So Arslan sees Romanos' mistakes, and he even still, after like the second day, tries to send some dignitaries under an al-Mubal seeking a parley. Now, the delegation was coldly welcomed by Romanos, who rejects peace, and we have to ask why, having no word of the whereabouts of Tarquiniotes' forces in Roussel's, that his best troops, most of them infantry, why would he, and then he just lost Basilaki's, and Briones' left wing got a little battered. Why would he not accept his parley? I guess it's just Romanos was so headstrong and thinking, okay, Tark and his 20,000 men are going to show up any day, and it's gonna change the battle, and I don't need to go back to the capital now with everybody knowing that I accepted some parley and peace treaty and going back with my head between my legs. So I get it. There's a lot at stake here. So he just, I guess, rather accept defeat if it does happen than a parley, a truce. So what happens is, so the delegates go off and the battle continues, and a part of the Armenian troops on the right wing under the command of Theodore Eliates deserts, causing confusion, and the battle allowing the right wing to fold and be routed. So this causes Romanos and his renegades to assist in ensuring getting enveloped and surrounded. So kudos to Briones for holding his left wing and holding ground, giving all the confusion and disorder before succumbing to Arslan's forces. So Briones starts to see, okay, the battle's lost. He retreats in order. Now, this is where this Ducas takes the 5,000 men and starts saying, oh, the emperor's dead, and leaves the battlefield. So everything just goes to shit for Romanos. This is probably why the Pechenegs decide, hey, battle's done, let's go loot the camp, in which they do. So Andronicus realized he was needed to sway the battle in favor, and realized Romanos was about to be encircled, and left and headed for Constantinople. Stating the emperor was killed. This news had reached Briones, who tried to hold his side as long as possible, eventually giving up. Overall, Romanos, not being fit for military command, did not command the respect and loyalty of some of his general staff and even his men. It clearly shows for years of defeat and no real progress militarily with Romanos, they still march with him after being released by Arslan to reclaim his throne after 8 days of being held captive. So it's like, again, I'm talking about these qualities of Romanos. So, okay, I don't think he was a very good general. He was, like I said, mediocre. Probably a decent emperor. The thing is even with all these defeats and no progress, he still had this great personality, these traits that really showed these men still staying loyal to him, even though words back to the capital, he's overthrown. They put Michael Ducas on the throne. It's like they still want to fight to have him reclaim his being the emperor. So it does show a lot about his character. So going back, so Eliates, Basilaki's, and Briones all try to help him, but each one of them were defeated. Now, Romanos was promised if he submitted and gave up the throne, he would be exiled to a monastery. So after having Eleates being defeated in battle with Romanos, trying to take back the throne, he was blinded really badly right there with 10 poles, having his eyes gouged out. Basilikes eventually tries to do a civil war and take the throne. He's beaten by Alexios, and he has his eyes gouged out. Brandos the Elder says, fuck it, I'm not going to, um, tries to take the goes. Oh wait, I think it was Brioneos the Elder, if I'm not mistaken, tried to take the throne too the same time as Botaniades, and he too gets beaten by Alexios, and in turn gets blinded. So yeah, so Romanos was promised this if he submitted, he'd go to a monastery, but John Ducas lied and had him blinded, which caused him a bad infection, and after like a couple weeks, he died. Um, Many disagreed on how unfairly treated Romanos was. Even John's son Andronicus, the one that betrayed him in Battle of Manzikert, even felt bad. He was opposed to his blinding. But regardless, John saw him as a threat and said, "No, we're gonna blind this guy." I believe this act is, as well as betrayal and conspiracy committed by the Ducas family. Seppo sat unwell with many of the generals that served Romanos. So that it didn't like Botaniades. This caused such a bad civil war, which I believe really caused the imperial collapse of the Byzantine Empire. Now we know that the Turks had Brianos dead to rights. I need to mention too, um, Chakatar, how do you completely say his name, was killed in 1072. Trying to help also Romanos reclaim his empire. Um, Chakatar was a very loyal Armenian. He was elevated to a higher rank, like a magistros, by Romanos when Romanos became emperor. So he really felt he owed a lot to Romanos, and that led to his death in 1072 in battle. Now, all this shit caused all these like almost 10 civil wars from like 1071 all the way to 1081 when Alexios first takes over. This is just so all we're seeing is all this wasted manpower. It's like Imperial Army versus Imperial Army on multiple occasions. And this was disastrous for the Eastern Roman Empire, not the Battle of Manzikert, because we saw very minimal losses of men at Manzikert. So we still see this. This is what really caused these civil wars, the Seljuk Turks to take over the Anatolia for good. So, sum it up, the only thing after all these civil wars, the good thing was, in my opinion, and other people disagree, was Alexios I taking over. I mean, from the Kominoi, from the three, Alexios, John, and Manuel, really hit a combined of 99 years of them ruling the empire, which really helped stop the bleeding. And we do see back and forth, some of them taking over some of Anatolia and whatnot. But it was the best thing for the empire. It really would have been probably really a shit show for them if Lexios didn't take over. I don't know what would have happened exactly, but it would not have been a good. So guys, if you have any comments or anything that I told was wrong, please leave comments. Let me know. Thank you.